The third blow would land 9 months later when Charlie, the first of the 7 Longfellow children, would come to his father's study and say to him, "Father, I share your hatred of slavery, but I do not share your hatred of war. Rather than just talking about it as you do, I'm going to do something about it." Henry understood exactly what that meant and forbid his son to leave the house or to enlist in the army. Charlie literally had to run away from home in order to carry out his desire to defeat slavery during the Great Civil War. 9 months later, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow received the second worst telegram that any parent can receive who has a child in harm's way. "Come get what's left of your son. Better he should die in the bosom of family and loving friends than amid the death cries of strangers in a crowded hospital infirmary." Henry wouldn't even allow the servants to go get Charlie. He went and got him himself, brought him back to the house. Charlie, however, remembered all the wonderful times he'd had in his father's study over the years and wanted to remain there during his convalescence. Henry waited on him hands and foot and fluffed his pillows so that he could sit in a chair next to his desk. The Longfellow study to this day is at 105 Brattle Street in Boston, Massachusetts, and can be visited between the spring and the fall months. It has been restored to exactly how it was when Henry lived there, and the study is as it was to this very day. If we were to take a close look at the desk in that study, you will see a study that most likely had Henry's pictures of his 2 ex-wives and the wingback chair that his son Charlie would sit in with pillows. It is very probable that after 2 weeks, Charlie could see that his father was exhausted and not sleeping at night, and so he began to pretend to be asleep so his father could doze and catch a little rest. Longfellow scholars claim that this poem was written on Christmas Eve, 1864. I am not a scholar, let alone a Longfellow scholar, but I do disagree with that. When the first stanza says, "I heard the bells on Christmas Day," and when the third stanza says, "the world revolved from night to day," I'm guessing this had to happen in the wee hours of Christmas morning. Beyond that, the church bell that figures so prominently is at the Brattle Street Square Church, still there to this day, and resides in the church tower of that church. It is purely theoretical. Everything I've told you up till now is rock-solid history, but these next few moments is a pure guess on my part, but a pure guess backed up by the facts that we do have. I am willing to bet that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow sat at his desk on this very sad and very tired Christmas Eve and looked at the picture of his first wife, and the tears rolled down his cheeks. And he looked at the picture of his second wife, and the tears rolled down his cheeks, and looked over at his son dying in front of him right next to his desk. And I think the tears rolled down his cheeks, and he pondered the terrible circumstances that he was in. I think a rage seized him, and I think he fell asleep in this angry rage of exhaustion. And when he awoke, I believe the bell ringer, who was probably late, woke him with the ringing of the bells, which I consider remarkable if you recall that people who live next to train tracks, in very short order, can't hear the train anymore. And people who have lived a block and a half away from a church bell, after a few decades, don't hear the church bell ringing every hour on the hour, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. But Henry awoke to the ringing of the bells, and he wrote, "I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And thought how as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men, till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then I think something very dark came over Henry's soul. I think he remembered the first wife, the second wife, and the son dying next to his desk. And I believe the rage came out. Now you need to appreciate that the next two stanzas are often removed by the politically correct folks who would spare us any sort of reality whatsoever. But this is what Henry wrote next. Then from each black accursed mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent and made forlorn the households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. The despair does not stop at this point, but it shifts from the external to the internal. The dark third stanza of his poem reads, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men." But after he writes this, it is my guess, cannot prove it, that the bell ringer who lost count of how many times he rang the bell despairs of trying to remember and just rings 3 more times just to make sure it's more than 12 at least. This poem so far has been 3 stanzas of despair and 3 stanzas before that of delight. And now he has to do something. O. Henry, the other writer, observes that this life is made of sobs, sniffles, and sighs, with sniffles predominating. Longfellow observes in this final stanza that there is yet a reclamation to our darkest moments and our worst fears. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. So goes the old Christmas carol that was never intended to be a carol. The poem that was never intended to be a public poem. And this poem documents a man's struggle to cope with outrageous circumstances at a time of year when no one should be having to struggle with anything. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow becomes a kind of explorer of the dark recesses of the human soul. If you're watching carefully, if you're listening carefully, he can become our guide through this treacherous terrain. Did this explorer of the soul leave us a travel log? I'm sorry, he did not, and I wish he did. Did he leave us a map? I'm afraid he did not. But he did leave us breadcrumbs that if we are willing to follow, we will find a redemption and a reclamation in our darkest moments and our worst fears. I know very well that it is politically incorrect to say this, but to all of my friends and family watching this, I wish you a Merry Christmas, an incredible, prosperous New Year, and peace on earth, goodwill to men.